From the nation's capital, the Conservative Caucus presents Conservative Roundtable, an in-depth look at today's most important issues.
Welcome to Conservative Roundtable. My name's Howard Phillips. I'm chairman of the Conservative Caucus, which sponsors Roundtable, now being broadcast coast to coast throughout the length and breadth of the great American Republic. And if it's not being shown in your community, you can check it out on YouTube. Our special guest today is a man of significant accomplishment, Marc Morano. He has been all over the conservative movement in the best sense of the word. He went to George Mason University, studied under Walter Williams. The Milton Friedman book, Free to Choose, had a big impact on his thinking. He's married with a lovely family. He has worked for Senator James Inhofe of Oklahoma and had a big impact in enabling Inhofe to provide leadership against the myth of global warming. He was associated for 4 years with Rush Limbaugh. I'm privileged to say that he worked with me for a while. He worked with Paul Weyrich and others. And he now heads an organization called Climate Depot, or as they say in French, Depot. And this is for our Canadian audience. And literally no one has done more to deconstruct the myth of global warming than Marc Morano. He's had an impact all over the world. He was at the conference in Copenhagen. He's had an impact here. He puts out tremendous information on it. And as we were chatting before the broadcast, in many ways, the fall of the Berlin Wall, which came after something that Marc had done in that period of history, was analogous to the fall of Climategate, as the corruption and misrepresentations were exposed, many of them by our guest. Well, Marc, talk to us about climate change and global warming.
Well, thank you, Howard. It's absolutely true that at the end of 2009 and now 2010, that this is the Berlin Wall moment in global warming. The wall has come tumbling down on scientific corruption, on intimidation, on destroying other scientists' career, on falsification of data, on manipulation of data, on a manufactured consensus, all led by the United Nations Climate Panel, which was begun in 1988. It came tumbling down in November of 2009, and it has been sliding and disintegrating almost daily since that time, to the point now where even former UN chairmen, former top scientists of the UN are disgusted, calling for resignations. They're calling for independent reviews. It is UN scientists turning on UN scientists. It is the greatest thing we could have ever seen for science.
What specifically happened to torch the climate change movement?
What happened was right before Thanksgiving here in America in 2009, November, a series of emails were posted on a website. They believe it may have been a Russian server. They don't know how it came out. But essentially, this was a Freedom of Information Act request at the University in East Anglia, which was, again, home to the upper echelon of United Nations scientists, were preparing. They didn't have to release it. They won the battle, so they kept all these files. Some disgruntled employee, it appears, released these out in the public, spanning a decade. Email after email of top UN scientists discussing how they were manipulating data, discussing how they were keeping their skeptical scientists out of peer review, discussing their own private doubts.
Out of peer review.
Out of peer-reviewed literature. In other words, a skeptical scientist couldn't get his work published because they controlled the agenda. This was a small cabal of scientists. We're talking under 100, for the most part, that controlled this worldwide agenda and dictated it through huge grants of money, power, political correctness, and just sheer intimidation. I mean, this was just, and we had known this for years, but these emails actually gave the top scientists their name, date, exact hour, minute that this stuff was happening. And we also discovered just gate after gate after these emails came out. And when I say gates, I'm referring to Watergate scandals, everything from Amazon Gate to Sea Level Gate, to Chinese temperature gate. One series of error. These emails opened the floodgates to the point where the UK media, and to a lesser extent the US media, started going after it. And this became just a complete unraveling going into January 2010, February 2010, March, and now we're at a point where public opinion has turned so viciously against this global warming movement that everyone thought was so in the tank, everyone thought was a sure thing.
The big snowfalls didn't help the climate change.
No, they didn't. In fact, I was in Copenhagen. You referenced that when we actually benefited from President Obama's sheer ineptitude at diplomacy. He showed up in Copenhagen right before the D.C. blizzard, the first D.C. blizzard. We had 3 this year, 3 this past winter. He showed up.
But they were warm blizzards.
They were of course, Al Gore claims that these blizzards were predicted by global warming, that record cold. Yet this is the new level of climate astrology, whether it's record cold, record snow,
astrology
record
or
heat.
astronomy.
Astrology. This is tarot card science. This is what they're promoting. Whatever happens fills their theory. Record cold. Well, that's consistent with global warming. Record warm. Well, of course that's consistent. Drought, floods, hurricanes, tornado. Well, that's all consistent with global warming. It's become, as some scientists say, a pseudoscience, and this is a level, to the point where Energy Secretary Chu has actually come out and said that he is now, science tells, at no other time in history has science told us for certain what the Earth will be like 100 years from now. He believes science is speaking in his ear, telling him what the future will be. This is a level of tarot cards. He should be on a boardwalk dispensing this with tarot cards. This is the level of science that's happened. One of the things, actually Michigan Senator Debbie Stabenow actually came out and said, global warming creates volatility. I feel it when I'm flying. The storms are more volatile. This is where we were in 2009 America with the absurdity of this climate astrology movement, where now turbulence on your airplane was global warming. It gets worse, Howard. Hookers in Africa, prostitution. The UN came out and said that women were being forced to become prostitutes because of drought caused by man-made global warming. So now African dads were being told that their daughters were becoming hookers because of U.S. emissions in the wealthy Western world. It was a perversion of science, a perversion of common sense. But this is what continued to go on. And it became this gigantic house of cards. And once it collapsed spectacularly. And it's been a joy to watch the stench just overpowering at times. But it's something that needs to happen.
What is the role of former U.S. Vice President Al Gore in this whole thing?
Al Gore was on the quest to be the world's first carbon billionaire. He had a company invested with Kleiner Perkins. They invested $1 billion in 40 different companies. And all of these investments, and he is tied to the Chicago Carbon Exchange, the London Carbon Exchange, all of these investments were dependent on Al Gore's ability to lobby the public and lobby Congress to pass carbon trading mandates forced by the U.S. government and by international governments through UN treaties to basically make him a billionaire. It's not to say he didn't believe it, but the point is he was also set up very well financially. And I don't know what other industry the news media will let someone get away with.
He's now worth a lot of money.
He went from $1 to $2 million net worth when he left the vice presidency in 2001 to Bloomberg News estimated a $100 million plus man by 2000, I think it was 2008, and that's a couple years ago. Now, with the collapse of Climategate, Al Gore's net worth may be collapsing. Carbon markets around the world, these bogus fiat currency. This is a fiat currency created out of thin air. As John Warner, the disgraceful former GOP senator of Virginia, tried to set up a carbon board, modeled after the Federal Reserve, where you'd have unelected bureaucrats deciding the price of carbon, which, by the way, we're carbon-based life. We exhale CO2 we inhale oxygen, we exhale CO2 from our bodies. This is a level of control that George Orwell didn't contemplate. One of the scientists, Richard Lindzen, said it best. He who controls carbon controls life. It's a bureaucrat's dream to control carbon dioxide, and Washington had become a field of dreams. That is why Climategate was probably the most fortuitous event, potentially in the modern history of human freedom, because if they got their hands on controlling what we exhale from our mouth, it used to be the joke, they can't tax the air we breathe. Well, this was about the level. They were about to be able to do it. And now the public opinion is turning so much. It is so toxic. John Kerry, the lead author of the global warming bill, came out just this spring and said, this is not a climate bill. This is a jobs bill. John Kerry, Barbara Boxer, and GOP Senator Graham from
Lindsey Graham
are terrified of the phrase global warming. John McCain, who sponsored 2 global warming bills, is now running so scared he told one radio interview he never sponsored bills restricting carbon dioxide, which was a bald-faced error.
He was not an error; it was a lie.
It was a lie. I was trying to be gentle there. He also has said that he won't vote for this bill. It's a farce. He would never support it. He's called it a joke. John McCain is running scared, and this was Mr. Global Warming. Charlie Crist in Florida running away from it. Tim Pawlenty reversed himself on this issue.
Pawlenty's the governor of Minnesota.
Governor of Minnesota, Charlie Crist, governor of Florida. The LA Times actually just did an article citing me, and their take was global warming skepticism.
And by the way, you were named Man of the Year by Accuracy Admitted.
They got their journalism award, which I was very thankful for. It presented at CPAC. But the LA Times is even recognizing it. They're saying global warming skepticism is a new litmus test for the GOP. That's stunning from 2 years ago when I was sitting in Environment and Public Works Committee in the Senate, where GOP staffers were basically saying they were terrified of opposing global warming for being seen as against the environment.
Stay with us. We're going to be back with more Marc Morano right after these messages.
You are a defender of liberty. You spoke out.
That is part of your job.
You were heard in Congress.
No.
You marched. You created a new movement. You endured attacks.
You see folks waving tea bags around.
Now you can help to
Repeal the bill.
go to sendthemamessage.com. Print the pledge to repeal Obamacare. Send it to your representative, senators, and candidates to sign that they pledge to repeal the bill. Repeal the bill. Repeal the bill.
Repeal the bill.
Repeal the bill.
Repeal the bill. Repeal the bill. Repeal the bill.
Repeal the bill now.
Go to sendthemamessage.com and help.
Repeal the bill.
Hi, I'm United States Representative Thaddeus McCotter from Michigan's 11th Congressional District. As we enter a new millennium of hope and peril, with so many problems besetting our country and yet so many opportunities before us, it is oftentimes tempting to think that your voice doesn't matter. What can one person do to make a difference in the life of their community and their country? Well, the first thing you can do is to contact your legislator. You are one of the sovereign citizens of the United States. You elect your servants to work for you in Congress. Let them know what you think. Send them a letter, send them an email, call them on the phone. Your voice matters. Because if you don't raise your voice in the interests of our free republic, who will?
Welcome back. I'm Howard Phillips with Marc Morano, the leading opponent of the fraud called global warming. Mark, the number one critic of the myth of global warming in a high elected office is Senator Inhofe of Oklahoma. And the reason he's playing such a prominent role is you. How did you do it?
Well, to give him credit, he was there in 2003. Several years before I got there, he declared, he asked on the Senate floor, when it wasn't popular to do this, he said that man-made global warming may be the greatest hoax of all time. And then I joined his staff a few years after that. I stayed with him for 3 years. And what we did, he was an amazing man. His courage is without peer. He would go to the UN conferences after calling global warming a hoax. He would be jeered and attacked. He just went to Copenhagen as well, surrounded by hundreds of reporters, and told them it was a hoax and that this was a fraud and they were wasting their time. And these lefty European reporters were shouting at him and trying to insult him. It was just a joy to see. He accepts the old Pat Buchanan adage that the more negative publicity you get in Washington, the better off you're doing.
Well, he's a great man.
He really is, and I can't take credit for him, the courage in him standing up. And I joined him in 2006, and he just was amazing. He would give 1-2 hour floor speeches on the science of global warming when no other Republican would touch the science.
The communist government in China is not going to be exploited by kissing the ring of global warming, because they know that they need global warming to build up their industry. But it's not just in China. They're operating all over the world. What are they doing in Africa?
Well, China right now, as we were talking about, in terms of where they are, in terms of our money, they are basically are going to own the U.S. economically. And what's happened...
Although Japan is now our biggest creditor.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
That just happened recently.
Well, what's happened with global warming in China right now, China is being lauded by American, international, and European leftists as the model for us all to follow. And what China's done is they're paying lip service to worrying about global warming while they're building multiple new coal plants. But the left doesn't see that, which is fine for China, but it should be horrifying to the left. But they like their form of government. They like the fact that it's not a messy democracy. New York Times columnists are praising China for its lack of democracy. And what's happened across the board in Africa, and it's mostly actually through the UN, what's happened in Chad, in Kenya, and in several other countries, is the United Nations is enforcing bans on things like burning charcoal. And what's happening is it's leading to desperate families. People can't cook, they can't heat their huts, and their environmental ministers, feeling this international pressure on global warming, are like, well, of course cooking and eating are fundamental rights, but so is concern about global warming. We have 1.6 billion people in the world without even subsistence level of living, no electricity, no running water. And what's happened is everything from Oxfam to the United Nations and international pressure groups are going in there telling them that they're living correctly. Governor Jerry Brown of California, former governor, who may actually be running again for governor, said that the developing world's poor can't emulate Western prosperity. They have to stay low, and the U.S. needs to de-develop. This is a word John Holdren, a word that the population bomb expert Paul Ehrlich used. John Holdren, of course, Obama's top science advisor.
Sterilize your women. So
that's
because
right.
We have too many children.
That's right, and that's just permeates the movement. It's an anti-human agenda. The anti-human movement is what the environmental movement is. But what's happened here with the development of 1.6 billion people, they're being told they can't develop. And India, point blank, told the United Nations, we will not sign on to a global warming energy rationing treaty when 40% of our residents don't have electricity. Yet what the UN and what Hollywood celebrities that come to Earth Day, Chevy Chase, Tom Arnold, they'll say we can't let the developing world develop, and they will say we need to offer them subsidies to keep them at a low level. And Chevy Chase actually said openly, socialism works, Cuba's the model. This is coming from a Hollywood actor saying that Castro's doing it right and we're doing it wrong. This is the level we're dealing with, especially, and this permeates the United Nations. That view permeates the Obama administration. It permeates many leaders of the EU. We are fighting this international bureaucracy, which Al Gore openly says is leading to global governance. That's what they're trying to get their hands on. And that's, again, back to Climategate. It's been wonderful that Climategate has stopped that.
Well, you've been telling the truth, and that's made you public enemy number one for the left. I am not a regular reader of Rolling Stone magazine, but I got a copy recently which had your picture in it and listed you as one of the most dangerous people in the world.
I was flattered. Out of 17 planet killers, killers of the planet, I was number 6. And it was interesting. It included energy company CEOs, coal barons, U.S. senators, people like Warren Buffett. The first thing that happened, just to bring me back to earth, my mother happened to read this magazine. Her first word was, "What's wrong with you, Mark? Everyone else on this list is either a billionaire or a millionaire. Why aren't you?" And she looked at the list, and there I was. Rolling Stone and Newsweek magazine and a couple other, Grist magazine has said I'm one of the 5 agents of lethal delays.
You're one of 5 agents of the lethal delays in our response to escalating, accelerating, catastrophic global warming. And that was done as recently as November 11.
Yes,
last year.
What's happened is the left is beside themselves as they're getting just creamed scientifically, as they're getting creamed in the data. You could go from A to Z, from the Arctic to the Antarctic to sea level to Greenland to Mount Kilimanjaro to hurricanes to tornadoes, and it's just everything Al Gore said. Not only did it not happen, the opposite is pretty much happening. We're having record low tornadoes, record low hurricanes. We're having sea level that's either pausing, in some cases dropping, and it's just not accelerating the way they thought it was. We're having Antarctic ice grow to record levels. We're having the Arctic ice, which was Al Gore's poster child, recover now to more than 1.5 size of Texas in just the last 2 years. And it's just spectacular failure across the board scientifically, and now we have the scandal and we can expose all the corruption behind the scenes. It's a 1-2 punch. One of the key things here is I believe, and this might be cruel and might sound heartless, but we needed to kick them when they were up, and we need to kick them harder now that they're down. We cannot let them get back up, and I don't believe in any. What worries me now is even some senators are allowing these independent reviews of the UN, and they're going to have a reform process, possibly a new leader, and they're going to try to rehabilitate it. This is not something that should be rehabilitated. It should be booted to the ash heap of history.
Well, Mark, it's clear that you're not indifferent when this topic comes up. You feel very passionately about it. My question is why? How did you make this?
Very good question.
Why did you make this your issue?
I made it my issue. Environmentalism was kind of my issue. What happened was, when Reagan, I was a volunteer on Reagan's campaign in 1980, and I always said throughout the 1980s, I was a Republican except when it came to environmental issues. And I'd always grown up, and I love the recent...
Because they were not sufficiently environmental.
They were not sufficiently environmental, yeah. I grew up a household full of reptiles. We had alligators, snakes, turtles. It was like a laboratory. I spent my time in the woods. There's a recent book out, Last Child of the Woods. I spent every day in the woods. I loved nature. I loved the wilds. I loved animals. So I always looked at it as, of course, everyone's an environmentalist. You had to care for it. My moment of epiphany, moment of clarity, to use the alcoholics phrase, was 1992 during the Earth Summit in Rio, when the first George Bush went down there, headed by Maurice Strong of the UN. Well, Dixie Lee Ray, the nuclear physicist,
a terrific lady,
went down there, and I remember I was watching National Geographic. I was all into all that, and believing the Amazon rainforest was about to disappear. I was worried about the jungles. I always wanted to go to the jungle. I'd read Arthur Conan Doyle's The Lost World. I'd read big reader of Jules Verne. I was always fascinated. And Dixie Lee Ray pointed out at that summit that the Amazon was the least endangered, most intact forest. And I remember being like, that can't possibly be true. Everything I'd been told was a lie. I investigated it, found out she was right. That started me on a quest of feeling I was conned when it came to environmental issues. I then worked for Rush Limbaugh. And I would go to all the animal rights marches, the Earth Day marches, the environmental marches, and I would start seeing this real agenda. And then culminating in the late 80s, I did a documentary on the Amazon rainforest. I got to go to the Amazon twice, investigate this firsthand. I talked to the scientists there who threw down the books of the environmentalists and said, these are lies, this is false, this is not true. These were scientists that were passionate, cared about the environment. They didn't like the lying. So that set the stage before I ever even dealt with global warming. And then by about 2000, I shifted gears as the whole environmental movement and did their chips, their poker chips, all in on global warming. Started studying global warming, and I found the same pattern. They were conning people. These were wild distortions, exaggerations, fabrications. It was a political movement, not a scientific movement. I was perfectly prepared to take on global warming after having dealt with endangered species, wetlands, deforestation issues. So I made the environment my passion my whole life, and I made it my career, and then global warming came along, and it was a natural fit.
Don't go away. Don't you go away. We're going to take a break, and when we come back, we'll have some final thoughts from our special guest, public enemy number one to the radical, lying, dishonest environmentalist, Mr. Marc Morano.
This is Duncan Hunter, Congressman San Diego, and you know, I built that border fence that we use in San Diego right now, the double fence, and I wrote the law that takes the fence some 700 plus miles across Arizona, New Mexico, Texas, and California. And I just want to urge everyone, stand strong on border control. And don't open the door to amnesty, because if you open the door to amnesty, we're going to see massive waves of folks coming into this country illegally, and you'll have lots of people coming in illegally expecting to catch the next amnesty and the next amnesty. We need border control, and we need to enforce existing laws. Hang in there.
Welcome back. I'm Howard Phillips, chairman of the Conservative Caucus, which sponsors Conservative Roundtable. If we're not on TV in your community, you can check us out on YouTube. If you're interested in the kinds of issues which we discuss on Roundtable, please send us your contact information. Our fax is 703-281-4108, or you can snail mail us at 450 Maple Avenue East, Vienna, Virginia 22180. We'll send you at no cost or obligation some of our publications. You can learn more about the specifics of the types of issues we've been discussing. Mark, it's been great having you as a guest.
Thank you.
And you're able to cover a lot of ground in what you had to say, and I appreciate it. You've got a couple of minutes in which to give your parting thoughts.
Okay, my parting thoughts are very simple. They've perverted science to the point we've already mentioned where prostitution is a result of global warming. But what they've done...
It isn't really, but that's
no,
what
it's not. It's not really, but that's what their claims are. It's because that's where I bring up the climate astrology. What they've done, if you look back at primitive cultures, whether the Aztecs in 1450 or so, they killed people because of droughts and trying to change the weather. They slaughtered thousands of people. If you go back to the Salem witch trials, those were during... in New England, they were during the Little Ice Age, when there were huge crop failures, there were people dying, major problems with getting enough food. They blamed it on witches, so they burned people at the stake, accused them of witchcraft, thinking they could alter the weather. Well, we look back at that and say how backward those people are. Yet, in 2009 and 2010 America, our president, his administration, world Western leaders go to summits and have verbal, non-binding agreements to limit the Earth's thermostat to no more than 2-degree temperature rise. At the same time, in Uganda, tribes are blaming drought and bad weather on angry gods. And the news media is like those poor tribal backwards Africans, I'm paraphrasing, they believe that bad weather is caused by angry gods. Little do they know it's man-made global warming. Well, the question is simple. Who is more intellectually accurate? The tribes in Africa who believe angry gods are responsible for bad weather, or Western leaders who think they can actually control the Earth's thermostat? This is a frightening era we've become. They think your SUV is a weather machine. It's no better than the Aztecs.
Stay with us for our next program. Mark, thanks for being with us on this program, and keep up your great work.
Thank you, Howard.
Thank you.